On June 27, 1899, the first granite course of the new Fastnet rock lighthouse was laid 6 feet below high water mark, anchored directly into the natural shale pinnacle that rose 30 meters above the Atlantic. The engineering specifications called for a structure of unprecedented permanence, 89 courses of precisely cut Cornish granite, each stone locked to its neighbors through a comprehensive dovetail joint system that would render the entire tower a structural monolith. No individual stone could be extracted without removing every course above it. This was not an oversight in the design, it was the fundamental organizing principle. The commissioners of Irish Lights had concluded that Fastnet Rock's extreme isolation, 4.5 miles southwest of Cape Clear Island, demanded an engineering solution that prioritized absolute structural integrity over all other considerations. The original cast-iron tower, installed in 1854, had demonstrated adequate navigational performance, but suffered from maintenance vulnerabilities that extreme weather conditions repeatedly exploited. When similar towers failed catastrophically, the Calf Rock Tower destroyed in November 1881, the engineering response was not to improve maintenance procedures or enhance accessibility, but to design a structure so robust that maintenance would become theoretically unnecessary. William Douglas, the commissioner's chief engineer, embodied this design philosophy in every specification. The granite base measured 52 feet in diameter, tapering through an elliptical curve to a 26-foot diameter at the projecting balconies. The external form was calculated to deflect wave action cleanly away from the service areas, eliminating the spray penetration that had compromised the iron tower. But this hydrodynamic optimization came at the cost of operational flexibility. The entrance, positioned 57.75 feet above high water, could only be accessed during specific tide and weather conditions. Emergency evacuation or supply delivery outside these narrow windows became physically impossible. The tower's internal architecture reflected the same philosophical commitment to self-sufficiency through design permanence. Above the entrance level, 7 granite-floored rooms were arranged in vertical sequence: storeroom, oil storage, spare quarters, principal stores, kitchen, keeper's bedroom, and service room. Each floor served a specific function in the lighthouse's closed-loop operational system. Oil tanks in the second-level room fed a pump system that forced illumination oil to a supply tank in the lantern. The service room collected rainwater from the lantern and upper balcony through a cast-iron tank system. Gun cotton for the fog signal was stored in a felt-lined magazine on the first level, with detonators kept separately on the 4th level according to safety protocols. This vertical integration represented a sophisticated attempt to compress an entire shore-based support infrastructure into a single tower. But the design assumptions embedded within this compression would prove catastrophic under operational stress. The oil distribution system, despite redundant storage tanks, relied on a single pump mechanism and vertical supply line. Pump failure or line blockage would render all stored oil inaccessible to the lantern, regardless of total fuel quantity. The communication system, dependent on visual semaphore signals and limited wireless equipment, could only function during clear weather conditions, precisely when lighthouse services were least critical for navigation safety. The dovetail joint system that guaranteed structural permanence simultaneously guaranteed maintenance impossibility. Emergency repairs to critical systems could not be performed without dismantling substantial portions of the tower structure. The stones had been pre-cut and fitted in the contractor's Cornwall yard, then transported by the specially built vessel SS Eilean, and assembled through an elaborate system of pulleys and temporary masts. This construction methodology, while enabling precise fit tolerances, created a structure that could only be modified using the same complex logistics that had built it. Emergency field repairs using standard tools and locally available materials were prohibited by the design itself. The lighthouse's foundation system embodied the same contradiction between permanence and adaptability. The first 10 courses were built directly into the natural rock, creating an unbreakable connection between artificial structure and natural formation. Additional granite blocks filled holes in the foundation and spaces between tower and rock up to the entrance gallery level. This created absolute stability under normal conditions, but also eliminated any possibility of structural adjustment as the natural rock face weathered or shifted under Atlantic storm conditions. The water storage system demonstrated how self-sufficiency requirements generated new vulnerabilities. Built-in tanks within the 25th through 29th courses provided drinking water storage, while the service room tank collected rainwater from the lantern and balcony surfaces. This system eliminated dependence on regular water deliveries, but created a fixed storage capacity that could not be expanded during extended isolation periods. Water consumption calculations were based on normal crew complement and routine operations, with no margin for emergency situations requiring extended occupation or increased consumption due to stress, injury, or equipment cleaning requirements. The positioning of critical systems within the tower revealed how isolation requirements had distorted normal engineering priorities. The oil storage, fog signal magazine, and wireless equipment were distributed vertically through the structure, not for optimal operational efficiency, but to minimize external access requirements. This internal arrangement made routine maintenance a complex vertical expedition requiring keepers to navigate multiple levels carrying tools and materials through narrow staircases designed for normal passage, not emergency access or equipment transport. The Lighthouse's optical apparatus represented the pinnacle of contemporary engineering, a biform, four-sided dioptric system weighing 6 tons, floating in mercury to enable smooth rotation. The apparatus required a 290-pound weight falling at 49 feet per hour to maintain its 3 revolution per minute rotation speed. This mechanism could generate 750,000 candle power through the lens center, creating a flash visible at 27 nautical miles. But the precision required for this performance created maintenance dependencies that the tower's isolation made increasingly difficult to satisfy. The mercury flotation system required periodic replenishment and purification. The clockwork mechanism demanded regular adjustment and lubrication. The optical elements needed constant cleaning and alignment. Each of these maintenance requirements was manageable under normal shore-based conditions with regular supply access and specialized technical support. But Fastnet Rock's isolation transformed routine maintenance into complex logistical operations dependent on weather windows, sea conditions, and relief boat availability. The more sophisticated the equipment, the more specialized the maintenance requirements became, and the more vulnerable the system became to supply disruption or technical expertise shortage. The tower's communication systems revealed the same pattern of design assumptions, creating operational vulnerabilities. The Marconi wireless equipment, installed in 1904, enabled contact with passing vessels and shore stations during optimal atmospheric conditions. Semaphore signals provided backup communication during clear weather, but both systems failed precisely when lighthouse services became most critical, during storms, fog, or other adverse conditions that created navigation hazards, requiring immediate lighthouse function and emergency communication capability. The relief rotation system, 4 keepers on station, 2 on shore, with fortnightly exchanges, was designed to maintain human resources without requiring permanent large crew isolation. This rotation minimized individual exposure to psychological stress while ensuring adequate personnel for all operational requirements. But the system's dependency on regular boat access created predictable windows of vulnerability. Extended bad weather could prevent scheduled reliefs, forcing crew extension beyond planned limits. Emergency medical situations could occur during periods when evacuation was impossible. Equipment failures could strand inadequate personnel with insufficient expertise. The economic calculations that justified the lighthouse construction had valued capital investment over operational flexibility. The total cost of £70,387 for construction, compared to ongoing annual maintenance costs of approximately £1,000, suggested that front-end engineering investment could minimize long-term operational expenses. But these calculations assumed that operational requirements would remain constant and that design phase assumptions about maintenance needs, crew performance, and environmental conditions would prove accurate under all actual operating scenarios. The lighthouse design represented late Victorian confidence that engineering permanence could overcome environmental uncertainty. Every system was designed for reliability through robustness rather than reliability through adaptability. The structure could withstand any conceivable storm, but could not be modified to address unanticipated operational requirements. The oil storage could supply months of normal operation, but could not be supplemented during supply disruption. The crew quarters could house keepers comfortably for routine rotations, but could not accommodate emergency overcrowding or medical isolation requirements. This design philosophy assumed that comprehensive advanced planning could anticipate all operational scenarios and that permanent solutions were superior to flexible ones. The dovetail joint system embodied this assumption at the structural level. Absolute permanence achieved through absolute inflexibility. But operational reality would demonstrate that the same environmental uncertainty that demanded structural robustness also demanded operational adaptability that the design had systematically eliminated. The human factors architecture at Fastnet Rock reflected the same engineering assumption that had shaped the tower's granite structure. That systematic design could eliminate operational uncertainty through rigorous control of variables. The relief rotation system, 4 keepers on station, 2 on shore, alternating every fortnight, was calculated to provide optimal crew performance while minimizing psychological deterioration from extreme isolation. Each keeper would serve 4 weeks on station, followed by 2 weeks on shore, ensuring adequate rest while maintaining operational continuity through overlapping expertise and experience. The keepers' quarters within the tower had been designed with careful attention to habitability under confined conditions. The 6th-floor bedroom contained bunks, wardrobe, lockers, shelves, and a rail with sliding hooks, with cork carpet covering to reduce noise transmission between levels. The kitchen on the 5th floor provided cooking facilities, a circular table for shared meals, bookcase for recreational reading, and shelving for personal storage. The service room contained washing facilities and storage for personal effects. These accommodations exceeded the standards typical for lighthouse stations, reflecting recognition that Fastnet's isolation required enhanced living conditions to maintain keeper morale and performance. But the psychological calculations underlying this design contained the same fundamental error that characterized the tower's engineering: the assumption that controlled variables could predict actual performance under stress conditions. The fortnightly rotation schedule was based on contemporary understanding of isolation psychology, which suggested that limiting exposure duration would prevent the accumulation of stress-related performance degradation. This assumption failed to account for the cumulative effects of repeated isolation cycles, the psychological impact of emergency situations occurring during isolation periods, or the social dynamics of forced cohabitation under stressful conditions. The communication systems that connected the lighthouse to shore stations embodied similar assumptions about human factors reliability. Semaphore signals were transmitted 3 times daily during clear weather, using standardized flag patterns to communicate routine operational status, supply requirements, and personnel conditions. Emergency signals could be transmitted using canvas ball, cone, and diamond configurations designed for visibility during adverse weather. The wireless telegraph equipment enabled contact with passing vessels and shore stations, providing backup communication capability and extending the lighthouse's operational reach beyond visual signaling range. These communication protocols assumed that shore-based personnel could accurately interpret lighthouse status based on received signals and make appropriate response decisions during communication gaps. But this assumption required shore station operators to distinguish between communication failure due to equipment problems, weather interference, personnel incapacity, or emergency situations based solely on the absence of expected signals. The protocols provided no mechanism for distinguishing between routine communication interruption and operational emergency, forcing shore stations to make critical decisions based on incomplete information. The training regimen for lighthouse keepers reflected the period's confidence in procedural discipline as a solution to operational uncertainty. Keepers were trained in oil handling and lamp maintenance, fog signal operation, weather observation and recording, basic medical treatment, equipment repair, and emergency procedures. The training emphasized routine adherence and systematic record-keeping, based on the assumption that consistent execution of established procedures would ensure reliable lighthouse operation regardless of external conditions. But this training philosophy failed to address the reality that emergency situations would require keepers to perform beyond their training parameters, often under conditions that made standard procedures impossible or counterproductive. The fog signal operation, for example, required one keeper to maintain continuous watch for visibility conditions, while another operated the explosive charge firing mechanism every 5 minutes during fog or thick haze. This protocol assumed adequate personnel would always be available, and that the physical and psychological stress of continuous operation during extended fog periods would not degrade performance below acceptable standards. The maintenance procedures for critical systems demonstrated how procedural thinking could create, rather than eliminate human factors' vulnerabilities. The oil distribution system required regular pump operation to transfer oil from storage tanks to the lantern supply tank, with backup procedures for manual transfer if mechanical systems failed. These procedures assumed that keepers could perform maintenance operations regardless of weather conditions, tower motion during storms, or other environmental stresses that would make vertical travel and precise mechanical work physically dangerous or impossible. The fog signal operation revealed the most serious gap between procedural assumptions and operational reality. During fog conditions, precisely when lighthouse navigation services became most critical, the explosive charge system required continuous manual operation by dedicated personnel. One keeper maintained watch for visibility conditions, while another handled the electrical firing mechanism for gun cotton charges every 5 minutes. This operation continued until fog cleared, regardless of duration. Extended fog periods could last for days, requiring keepers to maintain alertness and precision under severe fatigue while performing tasks involving explosive materials. The protocol assumed that keeper performance would remain consistent regardless of operational stress duration, that adequate personnel would always be available for continuous operation, and that the psychological pressure of maintaining navigation safety for passing vessels would enhance rather than degrade performance. These assumptions ignored established understanding of human performance under sustained stress, sleep deprivation, and responsibility pressure. The medical emergency procedures exposed the most critical human factor's vulnerability, the assumption that emergency situations would occur during weather conditions permitting evacuation. The Lighthouse carried basic medical supplies, and keeper training included elementary treatment procedures, but serious injury or illness required mainland medical attention. Emergency evacuation procedures assumed that relief boats could reach the lighthouse during medical emergencies, regardless of weather conditions or sea state. This assumption created a predictable failure scenario. Medical emergencies were statistically more likely during storm conditions when physical stress, accident probability, and evacuation difficulty all increased simultaneously. The procedures provided no contingency for situations where emergency treatment requirements exceeded keeper capabilities, while evacuation remained impossible due to weather conditions. The provision supply system embodied similar assumptions about predictable operational requirements and controllable environmental variables. Keepers were required to maintain minimum 2-week food reserves at all times, with commissary supplies provided by the Irish Lights Administration. Salt beef, salt pork, tinned meats, tea, sugar, cocoa, condensed milk, biscuits, rice, and dried peas. Regular supply deliveries maintained these stocks, with emergency reserve provisions stored on station for unforeseen supply disruption. But the supply calculations were based on normal crew complement consuming rations at standard rates during routine operations. The system included no margin for increased consumption during stress periods, extended crew isolation, or emergency situations requiring additional personnel on station. Extended bad weather could prevent scheduled supply delivery while simultaneously increasing caloric requirements due to cold exposure and physical stress. Emergency situations could strand larger crews on station beyond design capacity while preventing access to additional supplies. The work schedule organization reflected mechanical thinking applied to human performance management. Keepers rotated between specific duties: light maintenance, weather observation, fog signal operation, general maintenance, supply management, on fixed schedules designed to ensure all functions received adequate attention while distributing workload evenly. The schedule assumed that human performance could be optimized through systematic organization and that individual capability variations could be controlled through training and discipline. This approach failed to account for the reality that emergency situations would require performance flexibility that rigid scheduling prevented. Fog signal operation might require continuous attention from multiple keepers during extended periods, disrupting all other scheduled activities. Equipment failures could demand immediate attention regardless of scheduled duties. Medical emergencies could remove personnel from normal rotation while increasing workload for remaining crew members. The record-keeping requirements revealed how administrative thinking had been imposed on operational reality without consideration of human factors constraints. Keepers maintained detailed logs of weather conditions, light operation, fog signal use, equipment status, supply consumption, and personnel status. These records provided shore stations with operational data and created accountability for proper procedure adherence. But the record-keeping assumed that keepers could maintain detailed documentation regardless of operational stress levels or emergency conditions. During crisis situations, precisely when accurate records would become most valuable, the personnel and time required for documentation might not be available. The administrative burden of record-keeping could conflict with immediate operational requirements, forcing keepers to choose between accurate documentation and effective emergency response. The social dynamics within the confined lighthouse environment had been addressed through personnel selection and rotation policies, but these measures were based on assumptions about predictable interpersonal behavior under controlled conditions. Keepers were selected for technical competence, physical capability, and psychological stability, with personality compatibility considered during crew assignments. The confined living quarters and shared responsibilities were managed through established hierarchies and role definitions designed to minimize interpersonal conflict. But these social management systems assumed that personality conflicts and psychological stress would remain within manageable bounds regardless of isolation duration or emergency pressure. Extended weather delays that prevented scheduled reliefs could force incompatible personnel into prolonged cohabitation under stress conditions. Emergency situations could create role conflicts where established hierarchies might interfere with optimal response decisions. The social pressure of collective responsibility for navigation safety could amplify individual performance anxiety beyond the levels that selection and training had anticipated. The lighthouse design had optimized for individual human factors, living conditions, work schedules, duty rotation, while failing to address the collective human factors that would determine overall system performance. The assumption that individual reliability would aggregate into system reliability ignored the reality that group dynamics under stress could either enhance or degrade individual performance unpredictably. The operational vulnerability embedded within Fastnet Rock Lighthouse is design assumptions crystallized during extended fog conditions that began to affect the Irish coast with increasing frequency as Atlantic weather patterns shifted during the early 1900s. The fog signal system, a critical component of the lighthouse's navigation aid function, required continuous manual operation during reduced visibility periods, creating the first systematic stress test of the tower's human factors architecture. During normal visibility conditions, the lighthouse operated with routine precision. The oil-fired light rotated smoothly on its mercury bearing system, producing its characteristic single flash every 5 seconds with 750,000 candle power intensity. Weather observations proceeded according to schedule. Communication with shore stations maintained regular 3 times daily contact through semaphore signals. Supply deliveries arrived on the established fortnightly schedule. The system functioned exactly as designed, creating confidence in both shore-based administrators and lighthouse personnel that the engineering and operational assumptions underlying the design had been validated through successful practice. But fog conditions exposed the critical gap between design assumptions and operational reality. When visibility dropped below navigation safety standards, lighthouse protocols required activation of the explosive fog signal system. The procedure demanded that one keeper maintain continuous visual watch for changing visibility conditions, while another operated the electrical firing mechanism that detonated gun cotton charges every 5 minutes. This operation continued without interruption until visibility improved sufficiently to ensure navigation safety. The fog signal operation revealed how the lighthouse's self-sufficiency design had created a false redundancy. The tower contained adequate gun cotton supplies for extended fog periods, with charges stored in the felt-lined magazine on the first level, and detonators kept separately on the fourth level according to safety protocols. The storage capacity suggested operational independence from shore-based supply during normal fog duration, but the operation required continuous human performance at levels that training and rotation schedules had not anticipated. Extended fog periods lasting multiple days created personnel stress that the fortnightly rotation system had not been designed to address. The continuous watch requirement eliminated normal rest periods, while the responsibility for navigation safety created psychological pressure that affected sleep quality even during off-duty hours. The explosive handling procedures required sustained alertness and precision under conditions of fatigue, accumulation, and stress escalation. Keeper performance began to degrade according to predictable patterns that the training regimen had not addressed. The communication blackout that accompanied fog conditions created the first divergence between lighthouse operational reality and shore station understanding of system status. Semaphore signals became impossible during reduced visibility, while wireless telegraph equipment suffered from atmospheric interference that made reliable communication problematic. Shore stations could no longer verify lighthouse operational status precisely when that verification became most critical for navigation safety coordination. Shore-based administrators operated on the assumption that communication silence indicated normal lighthouse operation according to established protocols. This assumption was based on the logical reasoning that emergency conditions would generate increased communication attempts, while routine operation would follow standard communication schedules. But fog conditions created a scenario where emergency operational requirements, continuous fog signal operation, coincided with communication impossibility, forcing shore stations to make critical assumptions about lighthouse capability based on no information rather than verified data. The oil consumption patterns during extended fog periods exposed another critical gap between design calculations and operational reality. Normal lighthouse operation consumed oil at predictable rates based on routine light operation and keeper requirements. But fog conditions required continuous light operation. The light was exhibited continuously during fog signal operation rather than following normal flash patterns, while simultaneously demanding increased human activity levels that raised heating, cooking, and lamp fuel requirements within the tower. The oil distribution system, despite redundant storage capacity, relied on the single pump mechanism to transfer oil from base storage tanks to the lantern supply tank. Increased consumption rates during fog conditions required more frequent pump operation, creating additional mechanical stress on the system during periods when maintenance attention was focused on fog signal operation. The pump mechanism began showing signs of irregular performance, reduced transfer rates, increased operating noise, occasional failure to prime properly, that suggested developing mechanical problems requiring immediate attention. But fog signal operation requirements prevented keepers from performing the detailed mechanical inspection and maintenance that pump problems demanded. The continuous watch and explosive firing duties could not be interrupted for mechanical troubleshooting without compromising navigation safety for vessels depending on fog signal guidance. The operational priority system forced keepers to defer maintenance activities until fog conditions cleared, allowing mechanical problems to develop beyond the scope of field repair capabilities. The first critical equipment failure occurred during a fog period extending beyond the normal duration range that training scenarios had addressed. The oil pump system suffered a mechanical breakdown that prevented transfer from storage tanks to the lantern supply tank. The failure occurred while the lantern tank retained approximately 6 hours of oil for continuous operation at fog signal levels. Keepers faced an immediate decision about operational priorities with incomplete information about fog duration and no communication capability with shore stations for guidance. The pump failure created a cascading decision tree that exposed how the Lighthouse's design assumptions had eliminated operational flexibility. Manual oil transfer from base storage to the lantern required keepers to transport oil containers through the vertical tower structure, while maintaining continuous fog signal operation. The manual transfer procedure was physically demanding under normal conditions and became dangerous during the tower motion that accompanied the storm conditions typically associated with extended fog periods. Keepers attempted manual oil transfer using the tower's internal staircase system, but the elliptical stairs and granite floors became increasingly hazardous as oil spillage created slippery surfaces during the vertical transport operation. The physical effort required for manual oil hauling through multiple tower levels exhausted personnel already fatigued from continuous fog signal duties. The operation demanded precise coordination between oil transfer and fog signal operation, requiring personnel flexibility that the rigid duty assignment system had not anticipated. The manual oil transfer attempts succeeded in maintaining lantern operation for an additional 18 hours, but at the cost of severe personnel exhaustion and increased accident risk within the tower. Keepers were forced to work beyond their physical capacity while handling flammable materials in a confined space under stress conditions. The operational success created additional problems by demonstrating that emergency procedures could extend lighthouse capability beyond design parameters, encouraging riskier operation during subsequent emergencies. The fog condition finally cleared after 72 hours of continuous fog signal operation, revealing the full extent of mechanical degradation that had occurred during the emergency period. The oil pump system required complete rebuilding with replacement parts unavailable on station. The fog signal firing mechanism showed signs of accelerated wear from extended operation beyond normal duty cycles. Several gun cotton charges had misfired during the final hours of operation, suggesting deterioration in explosive materials or firing system reliability. Most critically, the Lighthouse personnel had performed beyond sustainable limits to maintain navigation services, creating a precedent for emergency operation that could not be safely repeated. Keepers had worked with minimal rest for 3 consecutive days while performing physically demanding tasks under severe responsibility pressure. The successful maintenance of lighthouse operation during the emergency had been achieved through human performance that could not be sustained during future emergencies without serious risk of personnel injury or complete operational failure. The shore station response to communication restoration revealed how information gaps during emergency periods had created false assumptions about lighthouse capability and operational status. Shore administrators had assumed that communication silence indicated normal operation according to established protocols. When communication resumed, initial reports focused on operational success. Lighthouse had maintained navigation services throughout the fog period, rather than on the emergency measures required to achieve that success or the mechanical degradation that had compromised future operational capability. The post-fog assessment documented equipment problems requiring mainland repair support, but the reporting system emphasized operational achievement rather than systemic vulnerability. The Lighthouse had successfully provided navigation services during challenging conditions, demonstrating the effectiveness of design redundancy and keeper training. This interpretation reinforced confidence in the operational assumptions underlying the Lighthouse design, while minimizing attention to the emergency measures that had been required and could not be safely repeated. The mechanical inspection revealed that the oil pump failure had resulted from accelerated wear due to increased operational demands during fog conditions, but also from deferred maintenance that normal protocols should have prevented. The fog signal operation had prevented routine maintenance attention during the period when mechanical problems could have been addressed through standard repair procedures. The continuous operational demands had forced deferral of maintenance until problems exceeded field repair capability. The personnel evaluation found that keepers had performed admirably under difficult conditions, maintaining navigation services through dedication and improvisation that exceeded training requirements. But the evaluation failed to address the sustainability issues that such performance created for future emergency response. The personnel had functioned beyond design parameters to maintain system operation, but could not repeat such performance without serious risk of exhaustion-related accidents or complete operational breakdown. The incident demonstrated how the lighthouse's isolation had transformed a routine equipment failure into a complex emergency requiring extraordinary human performance. Under shore-based conditions, oil pump problems would have been addressed through standard maintenance procedures with replacement parts and technical support readily available. The lighthouse's isolation converted routine maintenance into emergency improvisation requiring personnel to risk safety for operational continuity. The fog signal system had functioned as designed, providing navigation safety services during hazardous weather conditions. But the system's operational requirements had exceeded human performance assumptions, creating unsustainable workload demands that could not be repeated without compromising personnel safety or future operational capability. The successful emergency response had masked fundamental design vulnerabilities that would become critical during subsequent operational challenges. The mechanical degradation that followed the extended fog signal operation revealed how the lighthouse's design philosophy, robust systems operating independently of external support, had created a maintenance paradox that would drive the facility toward cascading system failure. The oil pump mechanism, rebuilt temporarily using improvised components and modified operating procedures, demonstrated reduced reliability that required increased monitoring and more frequent intervention, precisely when other critical systems also demanded additional attention. The pump rebuilding process exposed the fundamental constraint imposed by the lighthouse's isolation. Repair procedures designed for shore-based workshops had to be adapted for execution within the granite tower using limited tools and improvised materials. The pump housing, originally machined to precise tolerances, could only be repaired through hand-fitting techniques that achieved functional operation at the cost of reduced efficiency and accelerated wear patterns. Sealing surfaces that required precision grinding were smoothed using available abrasives, creating temporary solutions that would require more frequent maintenance intervention. The electrical system supporting the fog signal firing mechanism began showing similar signs of degradation that reflected the accelerated, aging effects of emergency operation beyond design parameters. The wiring insulation, subjected to continuous electrical cycling during the 72-hour fog period, showed signs of deterioration that created intermittent connection problems. The firing control circuits, originally designed for occasional use during brief fog periods, had been stressed through continuous operation that exceeded the electrical component specifications. These electrical problems created a particularly dangerous maintenance scenario within the confined tower environment. Electrical troubleshooting required personnel to work with live circuits while handling explosive materials in close proximity. The troubleshooting procedures assumed workshop conditions with adequate lighting, proper tools, and safety backup systems unavailable on the isolated lighthouse platform. Keepers were forced to perform electrical maintenance using improvised techniques that increased both electrocution and explosive accident risks. The light apparatus itself, the sophisticated rotating optical system that represented the lighthouse primary function, began demonstrating performance irregularities that reflected the cumulative stress of extended operation under non-standard conditions. The mercury bearing system that enabled smooth rotation required precise temperature control and protection from contamination. The continuous operation during fog conditions, combined with increased personnel activity within the lantern room during maintenance operations, had introduced contaminants into the mercury system that affected rotational smoothness. The optical cleaning procedures, normally performed during scheduled maintenance windows when light operation could be temporarily interrupted, became increasingly difficult as the mercury contamination created irregular rotation that made precise optical alignment problematic. The cleaning operations required keepers to work around moving optical elements while maintaining light operation, creating accident risks that standard procedures had not anticipated. The optical performance gradually degraded as cleaning became less effective and contamination accumulated. The clockwork mechanism driving the light rotation demonstrated the most serious mechanical degradation. The system relied on a 290-pound weight falling through a central tube at precisely 49 feet per hour to maintain the required 3 revolution per minute rotation speed. The mechanism required regular winding and adjustment to maintain accurate timing, but the continuous operation during fog conditions had prevented normal maintenance attention while accelerating wear through extended operation. The clockwork escapement mechanism showed signs of timing irregularity that created uneven rotation speeds, affecting the light's characteristic flash pattern that served as its navigation identification signature. The timing variations were subtle enough to remain within acceptable ranges for navigation purposes, but serious enough to indicate developing mechanical problems that would require significant repair intervention. The maintenance procedures for clockwork adjustment required precise calibration using specialized tools unavailable on the Lighthouse platform. The fog signal system itself suffered from the accumulated stress of continuous operation that had revealed fundamental design limitations. The explosive charge firing mechanism, subjected to over 1,000 individual firing cycles during the extended fog period, showed accelerated wear in the electrical firing circuits and mechanical charge handling components. The gun cotton storage system had been depleted beyond the reserve levels that safety protocols required, while some charges had demonstrated misfiring problems that suggested deterioration in explosive reliability. The charge preparation procedures required keepers to handle explosive materials under conditions that differed significantly from the controlled workshop environment assumed by safety protocols. The felt-lined storage areas had maintained proper temperature and humidity control, but the continuous access required during extended fog signal operation had compromised the environmental isolation that preserved explosive stability. Moisture infiltration and temperature fluctuations began affecting explosive performance in ways that created unpredictable firing delays and incomplete detonations. The tower's structural systems began showing the cumulative effects of the mechanical stress that emergency operations had imposed on components designed for routine loading patterns. The internal staircase system, subjected to continuous heavy traffic during manual oil transfer operations, showed accelerated wear in the cast iron treads and mounting hardware. The granite floors exhibited oil staining and surface damage from the emergency supply operations that had been performed under time pressure without proper protective measures. The living quarters environment deteriorated as the space designed for normal crew rotation accommodated personnel working beyond normal duty schedules while performing emergency maintenance operations. The ventilation system, designed for routine occupancy patterns, proved inadequate for the increased heat generation and air contamination produced by extended maintenance activities and emergency operation stress levels. The confined quarters created hygiene problems that affected personnel health and performance sustainability. The supply consumption patterns during the emergency period revealed how the Lighthouse's self-sufficiency calculations had failed to account for the increased resource requirements that emergency operations created. Food consumption increased beyond normal rates due to the physical demands of emergency maintenance and the stress-related appetite changes that affected personnel under sustained pressure. Fuel consumption for heating and lighting exceeded normal levels as emergency operations required extended illumination and increased comfort heating during the high-stress periods. The fresh water supply system demonstrated similar consumption pattern changes that challenged the Lighthouse's independence assumptions. The built-in water storage tanks within the tower courses provided adequate capacity for normal crew operations, but the increased consumption during emergency conditions, elevated drinking requirements due to physical stress, increased cleaning needs for equipment maintenance, emergency washing of oil-contaminated clothing and surfaces reduced water reserves below the safety margins that protocols required. The communication equipment suffered from the environmental degradation that emergency operations had introduced within the tower. The wireless telegraph apparatus, housed in the service room, required stable environmental conditions for reliable operation. The increased personnel activity, elevated temperatures from extended light operation, and contamination from oil vapors and other maintenance-related air pollutants affected the sensitive electronic equipment in ways that reduced communication reliability precisely when external contact became most critical. The weather monitoring instruments, essential for navigation condition assessment and emergency response decision-making, showed similar degradation from the environmental stress that emergency operations had created. The barometric pressure readings, wind speed measurements, and visibility assessments required accurate instrumentation that functioned reliably under all weather conditions. The contamination and vibration from emergency mechanical operations affected instrument calibration and reliability in ways that compromised decision-making capability during subsequent operational challenges. The personnel performance assessment revealed how the emergency response, while successful in maintaining lighthouse operation, had created physical and psychological stress patterns that affected future operational capability. The keepers who had performed the emergency maintenance operations showed signs of cumulative fatigue that could not be resolved through normal rest periods. The psychological pressure of responsibility for navigation safety during emergency conditions had created stress responses that affected subsequent decision-making and risk assessment capabilities. The maintenance backlog that accumulated during the emergency period created a cascade of deferred maintenance requirements that exceeded the lighthouse's routine capability for field repair. Multiple systems required attention simultaneously, while the spare parts inventory had been depleted through emergency repairs that used materials intended for routine maintenance. The maintenance workload exceeded the time and personnel resources available during normal operational periods, creating a maintenance deficit that could not be resolved without external technical support. The mechanical systems integration revealed how individual component degradation had begun affecting overall system performance in ways that multiplied operational complexity. The oil pump problems affected light reliability, which influenced navigation safety requirements for fog signal operation, which increased electrical system stress, which affected communication capability, which reduced emergency response coordination effectiveness. Each component problem created additional stress on other systems, generating cascade effects that amplified maintenance requirements beyond the lighthouse's self-sufficiency capability. The emergency response had demonstrated that the lighthouse could maintain navigation services under extreme conditions through extraordinary human effort and improvised technical solutions. But this success had been achieved at the cost of accelerated system degradation that compromised future operational reliability. The lighthouse had functioned beyond design parameters by degrading its long-term capability to provide the navigation safety services that justified its existence. The operational data collected during the emergency period documented the performance limits that human factors and mechanical systems could sustain under extreme stress. But the data also revealed that these performance limits exceeded the sustainable thresholds required for repeated emergency response. The lighthouse had achieved operational success during one emergency by compromising its capability to respond effectively to subsequent emergencies. The Lighthouse Administration's response to the documented equipment degradation revealed how institutional assumptions about remote facility management had created systematic gaps between policy decisions and operational reality. Shore-based administrators, operating with periodic status reports and limited direct observation capability, interpreted the lighthouse's successful emergency performance as validation of design effectiveness rather than recognition of system vulnerability requiring immediate intervention. The technical assessment submitted by lighthouse personnel documented specific equipment failures and maintenance requirements, but the reporting format emphasized operational achievements rather than systemic risks. Standard Lighthouse Administration procedures classified equipment problems according to routine maintenance categories, failing to capture the interconnected nature of degradation that emergency operations had created. Individual component failures were addressed through established supply and repair procedures, without recognition that the cumulative effect exceeded normal maintenance capability. The spare parts procurement system demonstrated how the lighthouse's isolation created logistical constraints that transformed routine maintenance into complex supply chain management. Replacement components for the oil pump mechanism required specialized machining that could only be performed by the original equipment manufacturers in England. The lead time for procurement, shipping, and delivery to the lighthouse platform extended through multiple weather seasons, during which temporary repairs would have to maintain system function using improvised solutions. The procurement procedures assumed that equipment failures would occur individually and could be addressed through sequential repair operations. But the emergency-induced degradation had affected multiple systems simultaneously, creating repair requirements that exceeded both the spare parts inventory and the logistical capacity for timely replacement. The lighthouse required comprehensive mechanical overhaul using resources that the standard supply system could not provide within operational timeframes. The technical expertise requirements for complex repairs exceeded the capabilities that lighthouse keeper training had been designed to provide. The optical system maintenance required precision instrument work that demanded specialized tools and technical knowledge unavailable on the lighthouse platform. The electrical system repairs required troubleshooting capabilities that exceeded field maintenance procedures, particularly when performed in the confined spaces and harsh environmental conditions that the lighthouse imposed. Shore-based administrators faced competing priorities that affected resource allocation decisions for lighthouse maintenance. The successful emergency response had demonstrated lighthouse reliability under extreme conditions, reducing perceived urgency for immediate maintenance intervention. Alternative navigation aids were under consideration that might eventually reduce dependence on isolated lighthouse platforms, affecting cost-benefit calculations for major maintenance investments. Limited maintenance budgets had to be allocated among multiple lighthouse facilities competing for resources. The decision to defer comprehensive maintenance in favor of continued operation using temporary repairs reflected institutional priorities that valued immediate navigation service provision over long-term facility reliability. This decision was based on the reasoning that the lighthouse had demonstrated capability to function under emergency conditions and could continue providing navigation services while maintenance needs were addressed through routine supply and repair procedures. But this decision failed to recognize that the temporary repairs and emergency operating procedures that had enabled successful crisis response could not be sustained indefinitely without creating more serious system failures. The lighthouse was operating beyond sustainable parameters while maintaining the appearance of normal function, creating false confidence in system reliability that would prove catastrophic during subsequent operational challenges. The meteorological data analysis revealed weather pattern changes that increased the probability of conditions requiring emergency lighthouse operation beyond historical averages. Atlantic storm systems were demonstrating increased frequency and duration that created extended periods of reduced visibility and hazardous navigation conditions. The fog patterns that had created the initial emergency were becoming more common, suggesting that emergency operating conditions might transition from exceptional situations to routine operational requirements. The navigation traffic patterns showed increasing vessel density along shipping routes that passed within the lighthouse's service area, elevating the navigation safety consequences of potential lighthouse failure. Commercial shipping schedules had become more rigid, reducing vessel flexibility to avoid hazardous areas during periods of navigation aid uncertainty. The lighthouse's navigation safety role was becoming more critical precisely as its operational reliability was being compromised by accumulated maintenance deficits. The communication system degradation began affecting emergency response coordination capability when the lighthouse most needed external support. The wireless telegraph equipment, compromised by environmental contamination during emergency operations, suffered intermittent failures that created communication gaps during critical decision-making periods. Shore stations could not distinguish between equipment problems and operational emergencies, forcing assumptions about lighthouse status based on incomplete information. The personnel rotation system, designed for normal operational conditions, proved inadequate for managing the sustained stress levels that equipment problems and emergency response requirements had created. Keepers who had performed during the initial emergency showed psychological and physical effects that required extended recovery periods exceeding the normal shore leave duration. The replacement personnel lacked the improvised repair experience that equipment problems increasingly required, creating knowledge transfer gaps that affected maintenance capability. The lighthouse began experiencing cascading minor failures that reflected the interconnected nature of degraded systems operating under continuing stress. Electrical problems created intermittent communication failures. Mechanical wear in the light rotation system created timing irregularities that affected navigation identification accuracy. Oil system problems required increased manual maintenance that diverted personnel attention from other critical monitoring duties. Each minor failure demanded immediate attention to prevent escalation into major operational breakdown, but the accumulating maintenance requirements exceeded the time and personnel resources available for comprehensive problem resolution. Keepers were forced into reactive maintenance patterns that addressed immediate symptoms rather than underlying system problems, creating maintenance practices that prevented systematic repair while enabling continued degradation. The oil consumption monitoring revealed supply vulnerability that the Lighthouse's self-sufficiency design had not anticipated. Increased consumption due to inefficient pump operation, combined with oil losses from manual transfer operations and equipment leaks, had reduced fuel reserves below the safety margins required for sustained operation. Emergency supply delivery would be required during weather conditions that might prevent access to the Lighthouse platform. The fog signal system faced similar supply constraints as gun cotton consumption exceeded normal rates due to misfiring problems and operational inefficiencies. The explosive materials required for fog signal operation demanded specialized storage and handling procedures that limited supply delivery scheduling to calm weather conditions. Extended fog periods could exhaust explosive supplies before replacement delivery became possible. The Lighthouse administration faced a decision point that revealed the fundamental design limitation embedded within the facility's isolation. Emergency repairs required external technical support that could only be provided under favorable weather conditions. But emergency conditions created precisely the weather patterns that prevented access for repair operations. The Lighthouse needed maintenance support when that support was impossible to deliver. Alternative strategies under consideration included temporary lighthouse shutdown for comprehensive repair, emergency personnel evacuation with automated emergency lighting systems, or continued operation with accepted equipment degradation until favorable weather permitted repair intervention. Each alternative involved navigation safety risks and economic costs that exceeded the original facility design assumptions. The shutdown option would eliminate navigation services during the period when shipping traffic and weather conditions created maximum navigation hazard. Automated emergency systems could provide basic light function, but could not maintain fog signal capability or respond to equipment failures. Continued operation risked complete facility failure during emergency conditions when lighthouse services would be most critical for navigation safety. Shore-based administrators recognized that the Lighthouse had reached a decision threshold where continued operation required acceptance of risks that exceeded the safety margins that navigation responsibility demanded. The facility was functioning within acceptable parameters under normal conditions, but could not guarantee performance under emergency conditions that were becoming increasingly common due to changing weather patterns and navigation traffic requirements. The Lighthouse personnel reported that the facility could maintain basic navigation services through continued improvised maintenance and emergency operating procedures, but could not guarantee sustained operation during multiple sequential emergency situations. The cumulative effect of equipment degradation and personnel stress had reduced the Lighthouse's emergency response capability below the levels that navigation safety responsibilities required. The institutional response revealed how remote facility management created decision-making constraints that prevented optimal resource allocation. Comprehensive maintenance required major expense authorization through administrative procedures designed for routine maintenance rather than emergency intervention. The approval process required documentation and justification procedures that could not be completed within the timeframes that equipment degradation imposed. The Lighthouse continued operating, while administrative procedures attempted to address maintenance requirements through established procurement and scheduling systems designed for normal operational support rather than emergency response. The facility maintained navigation services through continuing degradation that approached but had not yet reached complete failure thresholds, creating operational risk that navigation safety responsibilities could not justify indefinitely. The long-term operational data collected over subsequent decades revealed how the Lighthouse's design contradictions had created a predictable pattern of recurring crises that could only be resolved through fundamental system redesign rather than procedural modifications or equipment upgrades. The facility records documented repeated cycles of emergency operations followed by temporary repairs, followed by equipment degradation leading to subsequent emergencies that demonstrated the unsustainable nature of the original design philosophy. Between 1904 and 1969, Lighthouse logs documented over 40 instances of equipment failures requiring emergency maintenance under conditions that exceeded normal operational safety parameters. The pattern revealed systematic correlation between adverse weather conditions that created maximum navigation safety requirements and equipment stress levels that exceeded maintenance capability. The Lighthouse's most critical navigation service periods coincided precisely with conditions that made reliable equipment operation most difficult to sustain. The personnel records from this period documented cumulative psychological stress effects that confirmed the original training assumptions had fundamentally underestimated human performance requirements under sustained emergency conditions. Keeper turnover rates exceeded normal lighthouse facility averages by significant margins, with personnel requesting transfers due to stress-related health problems or family considerations related to extended isolation periods. The facility's human resource requirements proved unsustainable under the operational demands that effective lighthouse function imposed. The economic analysis of lifetime operational costs revealed that the lighthouse's maintenance requirements had exceeded the original design projections by orders of magnitude. The assumption that front-end capital investment could minimize ongoing operational expenses proved incorrect when emergency maintenance, specialized spare parts procurement, and personnel replacement costs were included in comprehensive cost accounting. The Lighthouse's operational economics demonstrated negative return on investment when full lifecycle costs were calculated against navigation services provided. The technological assessment conducted during the 1960s revealed that the engineering solutions that had seemed optimal during the 1890s had been superseded by developments that fundamentally altered the cost-benefit calculations for isolated facility operation. Electrical power generation, radio communication, and automated control systems provided alternatives to the human-dependent mechanical systems that had created the Lighthouse's operational vulnerabilities. The 1969 electrification project eliminated the oil distribution system that had been the source of the most serious operational failures. Electric lighting systems provided reliable operation without the fuel supply logistics that had created emergency operating conditions during extended isolation periods. The electrical power generation equipment required maintenance, but could be designed with redundancy and automated control that eliminated human intervention requirements during normal operation. The helicopter access capability that was established in 1969 fundamentally altered the emergency response equation that had driven the Lighthouse's original design philosophy. Personnel evacuation and emergency maintenance support could be provided during weather conditions that prevented boat access, eliminating the isolation constraints that had forced emergency operation beyond sustainable human performance limits. Technical expertise and specialized equipment could be deployed rapidly rather than requiring permanent station presence. The communication system modernization through radio and automated signaling eliminated the weather-dependent communication constraints that had created information gaps during emergency conditions. Shore stations could monitor lighthouse operational status continuously and coordinate emergency response based on accurate real-time data, rather than assumptions derived from communication silence. Emergency situations could be addressed through external support, rather than improvised local solutions. The fog signal automation in 1970 eliminated the most dangerous and physically demanding operational requirement that had created sustained personnel stress during adverse weather conditions. Automatic fog detection and signal activation provided navigation safety services without requiring continuous human monitoring and manual explosive handling during extended reduced visibility periods. The automated system operated more reliably than human-dependent procedures while eliminating the personnel safety risks that manual operation had imposed. The 1989 Lighthouse automation represented the complete elimination of the human factor's vulnerabilities that had been embedded within the original design. Automated systems could operate continuously without fatigue, stress, or psychological deterioration. Equipment monitoring and maintenance could be performed remotely with on-site intervention scheduled during favorable weather conditions rather than being required during emergency situations. Navigation safety services could be provided without requiring human presence on the isolated platform. The automation technology revealed that the 19th century design philosophy had optimized the wrong variables. Instead of designing robust systems that could operate despite isolation constraints, technology enabled elimination of the isolation constraints themselves through remote monitoring and unmanned operation. The Lighthouse could provide superior navigation safety services without requiring any permanent human presence or local maintenance capability. The mercury removal during the 2018-2019 modernization eliminated the final remnant of the original Lighthouse technology that had required specialized maintenance procedures and environmental hazard management. The LED rotating light system provided equivalent navigation performance using 30 watts compared to the 1,000-watt requirements of the original optical apparatus, while requiring minimal maintenance and no hazardous materials handling. The structural assessment that accompanied the LED installation revealed that the granite tower's dovetail joint system had achieved its intended permanence. The structure remained sound after over a century of Atlantic storm exposure, but the structural permanence that had been the Lighthouse's primary design achievement proved irrelevant to the operational reliability that navigation safety actually required. The tower served as a platform for automated equipment that could have been mounted on any stable structure without requiring the complex construction methodology that the dovetail joints had demanded. The operational performance comparison between manned and automated operation demonstrated conclusively that human presence had degraded rather than enhanced lighthouse reliability. Automated systems achieved significantly higher availability percentages, while eliminating the emergency response scenarios that had created navigation safety risks during critical weather conditions. The Lighthouse provided superior navigation services without human involvement than it had achieved through the sophisticated human factors management that the original design had attempted. The environmental impact assessment of Lighthouse automation revealed additional benefits that the original design had not considered. Elimination of personnel transport reduced carbon emissions from support vessel operations. Removal of hazardous materials eliminated environmental contamination risks. Reduced power consumption through LED technology minimized generator fuel requirements and associated air emissions. The automated Lighthouse achieved improved environmental performance while providing enhanced navigation safety services. The tourism development potential that emerged following automation demonstrated economic value that the original utilitarian design had not anticipated. The Lighthouse's historical significance and architectural achievement attracted visitors interested in maritime heritage, creating economic benefits for the surrounding region. The elimination of operational constraints through automation enabled public access that had been impossible during manned operation, converting the facility from pure navigation infrastructure into cultural and economic asset. The regulatory analysis of Lighthouse safety standards revealed how automation had eliminated the regulatory compliance challenges that manned operations had imposed. Personnel safety requirements, hazardous materials handling protocols, and emergency evacuation procedures had created complex regulatory oversight that automated systems avoided entirely. Navigation safety regulation could focus on service reliability rather than operational safety management. The international lighthouse development trends confirm that Fastnet's operational experience reflected universal challenges with isolated facility management rather than site-specific problems. Lighthouse facilities worldwide had experienced similar patterns of operational stress, maintenance challenges, and human factors problems that led to widespread adoption of automation technology. The design philosophy that had created Fastnet's operational contradictions had been replicated globally with similar results. The navigation technology evolution revealed how satellite-based positioning systems and electronic navigation aids had reduced dependence on visual lighthouse signals while creating new requirements for reliable automated beacon operation. Modern navigation systems required lighthouse signals as backup and verification for electronic systems, but demanded automated reliability rather than human-dependent operation. The lighthouse's navigation function had evolved to require precisely the automated operation that eliminated human factors' vulnerabilities. The forensic analysis of the lighthouse's operational history revealed that the fundamental design error had been the assumption that human reliability could be enhanced through engineering controls rather than eliminated through technological alternatives. Every sophisticated system designed to optimize human performance had created new opportunities for human factors failure. The engineering solutions that appeared most advanced during the 1890s had embedded operational vulnerabilities that technology eventually revealed as unnecessary. The Lighthouse's century of operational history demonstrated that the design philosophy of achieving reliability through robustness rather than adaptability had been comprehensively refuted by technological development. Robust systems required extensive maintenance that isolation made problematic. Adaptable systems using automated control and remote monitoring achieved higher reliability while eliminating maintenance accessibility problems. The engineering approach that had seemed optimal had been superseded by alternatives that the original designers could not have anticipated. The systemic lessons derived from Fastnet's operational experience influenced lighthouse design philosophy worldwide, leading to widespread adoption of automation technology that eliminated rather than managed human factors constraints. The lighthouse demonstrated that isolated facility operation required technological solutions rather than procedural solutions to achieve reliable performance under adverse conditions. The original engineering achievement, creating a permanent structure in an impossible location, had been rendered obsolete by technology that made permanent human presence unnecessary. The lighthouse continued operating as an automated facility providing navigation services superior to its original manned operation while serving as a monument to the engineering ambition that had created an operational challenge rather than solving one. The tower stood as evidence that sophisticated engineering could create rather than eliminate operational complexity when design assumptions failed to anticipate the full implications of technological constraints and human limitations operating under extreme environmental conditions.